friends. Welcome to episode 185 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian with now 15 years experience, I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I was so excited to connect this week with longtime listener Miranda, who is a teacher librarian in Australia. Miranda started tuning in to the podcast during season 1, and I'm forever grateful to those listeners because season 1 was a little lonely, and I needed that vote of confidence. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Helen in Australia, Chloe in Scotland, Ashley and Lyric in Georgia, Leah in Kansas, Susan in New Jersey, Kate in Washington State, and the students in Dr. Jameson's classes. I enjoyed meeting with you on Thursday. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter, my handle is at LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now a word from our official sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I am so excited to be working with them. Friends, we are in for a special treat today. We have Brian Gorman from Capstone, and I'd like to hear a little bit about Brian. So, Brian, would you introduce yourself to listeners?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Brian Gorman, and I'm an inside sales representative for Capstone. And excited to be here. Thank you so much, Amy.
Friends, I'm always grateful when, the experts come on the show and let me know what I am missing out on. And as part of the Capstone family, Brian is going to be giving us an inside scoop. And I'm so grateful that you're here today, Brian.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate it. Honored to be here. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey into Capstone and then a little bit of how Buncie's been integrated. So I was a schools relationship manager at Buncie for, I think it was 6.5 years. And then we were recently acquired by Capstone in September. So I've been with Capstone about a year now, or last September, I should say. And so Buncie was a free and paid for standalone creation tool. And so with the acquisition of Buncie, Capstone and Buncie started dancing together. And what it created was this new product called PebbleGo Create. And this is really an amazing and perfect marriage because with this tool, what you get is the ability for students to read content within PebbleGo. They could read an article on frogs or whatever it may be, and then they could activate that active learning piece and show within a creation tool what they've learned from said article. And they could do this a number of different ways. You could go a free-form way where teachers allow the students to sort of use their creativity, add animations, stickers, text, videos, you name it, or teachers could sort of give them some more direction, right? Hey, I only want 2 animations and a video because we understand younger students, they may get a little carried away with some of those things, but it allows them to express themselves in this digital workspace and show their understanding to their teachers in a creative way.
Well, and I also like that it's a safe space because having worked with our youngest patrons for many years, I know that that's always been the biggest concern, that we are making sure that when we bring our students into a digital workspace, that it is going to be a contained space, a space that does not take them out into the greater internet world. And that's something that this affords our students and the peace of mind for the educators who are bringing them into this space.
Yeah, no, 1000%. And with this, you still have one login. So there's no different platform or anything like that. Buncie still exists. So if you want that separate login, you can still do that. But within the PebbleGo Create platform specifically, you are contained within that space. It is safe, and it's been great to sort of work through, the privacy and security team and sort of see how do we work together to, one, make a great product, but two, ensure that our students are safe when they're using this product and, able to learn to the best of their ability.
Friends, I am so excited. Brian, I hope you join us again because I know I'd like to learn a little bit more about this platform, and listeners will as well. So thank you so much for joining with us today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Be sure to check out the links in our show notes to Capstone, PebbleGo Create, as well as connect with Brian Gorman on Twitter. We are so grateful Capstone is offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone Interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for our episode, Creating Culture Change, and my conversation with Madison Dearnaley and Dr. Kay Oddone. Friends, I am so excited. Madison Dearnaley and Dr. Kay Oddone, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us, Amy. It's so exciting to be here.
Agree. It's awesome. Thank you so much.
I am so grateful. Friends, when we are having a conversation a half a world away, it really does impress upon me. I know just how incredibly grateful I am to this, when we talk about this listening community, because this listening community, friends, are those in Australia are leading global downloads in this podcast and have for the past 4 years. I am so grateful to our listeners in Australia, those school librarians out there who are leading the charge. And so that makes this conversation all the more important. Madison, I'm so grateful to connect with you. We just celebrated our 1-year Twitter friendship. And it's really been fun because anytime that we've shared things, it's sort of like whenever I see Madison appear on Twitter, I'm like, oh my goodness, she's like in Australia. She's so far away. And we're right here. We're like Twitter friends. So Madison, would you please, for everyone, let us know where you are in the world. Tell us about your current library. Give us an idea about what grades you support, the programs you teach, and what's your schedule like?
Okay, so I am the Information Services Teacher Librarian at St. Paul's School in Bald Hills, Queensland. So that's on the east coast of Australia. We're an independent school that's from prep all the way through to year 12, which is quite common here in Australia to have these. From listening to the podcast and learning about American schools, it seems that that's perhaps not as common, but we have a few schools over here like that. So we have the incredible opportunity to work with students who are, 3 years old all the way through to 18 years old, which is really cool. So we have 2 libraries in our school. We have a junior library and a secondary library. They are currently joining, but the secondary library is getting a new space soon, so we won't be so close together next year. But I am very fortunate to work with an incredible team. So I have an amazing secondary library technician up in the secondary school library with myself. That's where I'm based mostly. And I have a junior teacher librarian down in the junior school, a junior library technician and a library assistant who is mainly in the junior library but works around. So incredibly blessed to have such an awesome team to work with. At the moment, I'm acting head of library, so I get to oversee both libraries, but I do work predominantly in the secondary school. So my schedule is a flexible schedule. I have 5 classes that are regular timetable classes, as well as then doing information services, lessons with classes, referencing classes, library classes, working with teachers to build assessment and assignments and building the collection. It's an incredible job and I absolutely love it.
Oh, it sounds fantastic. Madison, I've admired your blog and the resources which you share out over this past year, and we've broached the topic of recording an episode. And when we talked about it, your very first thought was to include Dr. Kay Oddone. And I'd love to know why.
Absolutely. Well, I could not be doing this without her. This sort of story started about a year ago when I'd started at my current school, so that I've been there a year and a half now. So And I was approached by another school and given an opportunity to take up another position. And I was really unsure. Should I be going for a full-time position? Because I was part-time at that time. I wasn't sure what to do. So I put out a call on Twitter, and it was something like, I really need a career mentor. Someone help, please. And I had some incredible responses. People jumped into my DMs and said, want to chat. And someone put up a message saying, you should join the ALIA mentoring program. So ALIA here in Australia is the Australian Library and Information Association. And they are, I guess, like your ALA over there, that they oversee public libraries, school libraries, academic libraries, people who work in museums, so all of us. And they run an incredible 1-year mentoring program. And so I went, okay, right, I'm going to sign up. And I signed up to that. And I was paired with Kay, who, definitely happy dancing happened when I found that after I picked my jaw up off the floor because I was so shocked. Because here in Australia, Kay is like our go-to sort of academic, and to be paired with Kay, shock ensured, and then happy dancing. And so Kay and I have been working together for the last sort of year in this mentoring partnership. And when I joined my new school, so my current school, a lot of the library team were telling me we don't have a good reading culture. And that would come up a lot. And they would say to me, kids don't read, or don't bother starting a book club. We don't get anyone. So when I was working with Kay, I went to her with this big long list of goals. This is what I wanted. And on there was how to build a good reading culture. And it was something that Kay said to me that really provoked a lot of thinking, that I went, okay, we've got to think about this a little bit more deeply. So it's through this partnership that I cannot have this conversation without Kay.
Oh, you know what? And friends, I always get excited when I get to sort of barge in on a friendship that two other people have enjoyed. I feel very selfish because I'm imposing myself on two friends, two colleagues who have been working together, and now I get to be the beneficiary, and we've pressed record. We all get to be the beneficiary of this wonderful working relationship that you two have. Dr. Kay Oddone, welcome to the conversation. I am so glad you could be here tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thank you, Madison, for saying all those kind things. Please call me Kay. Everyone knows me as Kay. No one calls me Doctor. I'm really honoured to be part of it and to support Madison, who's been doing incredible work, not only at her school with the reading culture, but also sharing so generously online with, all of her different work that she does.
All right. Well, fantastic. I will use Kay, but friends, if you work hard enough to get a PhD in anything, I'm going to call you Doctor. But if you say I call you Kay, we're good. So friends, this is usually the part where I'm going to ask Kay to tell me about your library. But in this case, your role is very different. Would you let us know what your job is like every day?
Sure. Thank you. So I have worked in school libraries in the past, but since completing my PhD, I have been working in universities, and currently my role is the course director and lecturer in the Master of Education Teacher Librarianship. So this is the only course, actually, sadly, in Australia that you can study to become a teacher librarian, a qualified teacher librarian in Australia. And basically, it's a master's qualification open to already qualified teachers who wish to move into the TL role. We call it TL, teacher librarian. Lots of people come to the master's degree because they have always had a passion for working in libraries, or they've always had a dream of working in libraries. Sometimes very experienced teachers want to really challenge themselves in a different area, but don't necessarily want to move into administration. And so we get a wide range of teachers with different backgrounds. And I lead this this course and also teach into it. So, and also participate in research in this area. So it's very exciting. It's very challenging. We have 500 students currently enrolled in the course, and almost all of them come from Australia, but we do have some international students, and from all over Australia. It's completely online. Being the only course, we have to connect remotely, and so I really enjoy connecting with all of these people who are joining our profession, excited and passionate and ready to embrace our area of education, which I think is just so exciting.
I'm so grateful you gave me that little explanation, because I'll tell you what, friends, I have been stalking these two people ever since they agreed to do this podcast. And Kay also has a blog which she generously shares, and I've included links in the show notes. And friends, you're going to want to make sure you include these lovely people in your virtual PLN. Kay, I'm hoping you will share with listeners, how has your time as a teacher librarian influenced your doctoral pursuits?
It's really interesting that you mentioned, Amy, just a moment ago about a virtual PLN, because my thesis was on how teachers use personal learning networks to expand on their professional learning and enhance their professional learning experiences. And the reason I was so interested in investigating this was because as a teacher librarian, I had benefited so much through my PLN, and I had felt so supported and connected as part of a learning network that I wanted to investigate that concept. And I wondered whether or not other people were also engaging in this type of learning. And I knew that some were, because they were the people I was connecting with. But I thought that perhaps there was some way to find a way to understand personal learning networks so that we could have them more recognized as a informal professional learning opportunity, but one that schools, administration, all of those types of systems also recognize, because they're so valuable and they do take time, but there's so many rewards from engaging in that way. And being a TL, I found my doctoral pursuits were enhanced because I already had built that expertise in researching and locating information. And so when I flipped from being a TL into being a PhD student, I didn't have to do all of the little tutorials about how to use the library and how to find research information, because I already was doing that in my everyday work. And I also had the added benefit that I had that network. So I felt confident I would actually reach out to journal authors, other academics, and say, hey, I'm reading this article and I don't understand this concept. Where did it come from? Like, can you help me with it a little bit more? And I actually was able to connect with academics and get information from the horse's mouth during my research. So I really felt that being a TL was a wonderful platform to begin my study, not only in terms of the area that I was studying, but also in terms of the process of study.
Oh, wonderful. I know a lot of listeners right now are just nodding their heads going, yep, because I do have listeners who are getting their PhD, and I know that they're very excited about it because there are so many things that they'd like to pursue in greater detail. And I just find that really inspiring when we hear people who've gone through the process, and it has absolutely been life-changing. This partnership, which culminates in both Kay and Madison presenting at a national conference in August, which is actually the end of winter for Australians, began in 2021 when Dr. Oddone posted a 3-part series titled Teacher Librarian as Leader. And I've included links in the show notes. Kay, I'd love to know more about what inspired you to write this series.
It's actually a kind of unexpected story. So when the Master of Education Teacher Librarianship at QUT, which was the university I was working at previously, when it was wrapped up, I decided that I would actually pursue another dream of mine, which was to work overseas. And I took up a position as head of libraries at the Australian International School in Singapore. And this is a huge dream of mine. And it was 2020 when that position arose. And so I arrived in late December 2020 in Singapore. My partner was still back in Australia. He was going to come and join me a few months later. And unfortunately, when I arrived in Singapore at about that time, COVID also arrived in Singapore and the rest of the world. And so it ended up that although I loved the position and I loved Singapore, I was trapped over there by myself, and it was a pretty unpredictable time in the world. And to be in a country that a foreign country by yourself, not knowing how long it would be until you could, see your family or get home or anything like that, I made the decision to come home, to break my contract and come home early. So I came home in September of 2020, and while I was in quarantine, thinking that I would be looking for a job for a little while, I actually was contacted by a colleague who said, I'm desperately looking for people who have librarianship backgrounds, because I know that you are great researchers and librarians are great, have this great ability to synthesize information. This person said, I'm working on developing a Master of Business Administration that's completely online. And we need people to do all of the research and design subjects, working with the subject matter experts. Would you like a job? And I said, wow, yes, I'd love a job. I never thought I'd be working on an MBA, but yes, absolutely. So I jumped at that chance, and I spent about a year working on that MBA at a different university, developing that course. And during the process of working on that course, one of the subjects that I was helping to develop was on business culture and leadership and leading changing cultures and things like this. And so I was engaging with a lot of business literature and reading all of this stuff, thinking, this is so relevant for teacher librarians. This is so important for TLs to be aware of, because there's so many parallels in ways that TLs can adapt this information about leadership and organizational cultures into their own practice. And so I decided that I would write this series of posts making that connection between the business literature that I was working with and the TLs, which really was my passion. I never intended to stay with the MBA program for a long time, And so, yeah, that's how it all came together. I felt that TLs could harness that information, and perhaps it wouldn't be they wouldn't naturally stumble across it. So I put it out there.
Well, and when I think about creating cultural change in our buildings, this could apply, as Madison said, to our reading culture. That makes sense. That I was like, that's what I thought about first. But also changing that culture of changing those attitudes that people have about their teacher librarian, about the role we serve in the building. In many cases, there's so many misconceptions about what school librarians and teacher librarians do. And I hear from so many different voices, people say, I have to educate my building. I have to educate my admin. I have to educate people about what I do, because people are so wrong in their understanding of what I do every day. We also have to change the people's attitudes about what our space is deemed for, what we can use that space for, and also all of those programming possibilities. And this is something of a campaign that I've been waging in my new job. And so that's why I'm so excited that we're having this conversation. Madison, at about what point did you start posting your blog posts on cultural change and trying to instigate change in your spaces where you work?
So when Kay and I started our mentoring partnership, part of that process is that you put forward a whole range of goals, I put forward a whole range of goals, and you meant to just do one or two. And so Kay helped me to narrow them down, and one of them was then this, how do I improve the reading culture? That my colleagues had said that's something that we really are struggling with. And so when I was saying, I'm being told that we have a poor reading culture. Kay said something to me along the lines of, how do you know that? And that really stopped me. And I went, okay, well, how do I actually measure this? How do we assess that? And so I started looking into, under Kay's direction, she said, have a look at these posts that I've written, have a look at organizational culture and culture change in the business world. And I started to look at that. And my process is to write. I love writing. So and that's where my blog sort of came out of, that I needed to digest these things as I was working through them.
Madison, you wrote in part 1, and I included this quote in our notes and I feel silly reading it because you're right here. Would you mind reading what you said in part 1? Because I love it. It's very profound. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're so right. But would you read this quote that you put in your first post? And friends, I will say right now, please make time to do that dive. We love this deep dive, and we have some time this summer to go and read Dr. K. Oddone's work, to read Madison's work. It really is fantastic. But Madison, would you read this quote that I pulled from your part 1?
Sure. Thanks, Amy. Changing a culture, such as a reading culture, is not as simple as putting in place a few special events or changing things around in the school library. If we truly wanted to make a significant and lasting impact, we needed to assess the culture of the school and enact change. It would take effort and time, but I was determined to make this a priority.
I love that. You're like, oh, and thank you for recognizing the time, friends. And I'm saying this to all my first year librarians, because I know there are a lot of you listening right now. Time. This takes time. There's no switch. You don't get to just flick a switch and change the culture in your building.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, I'm someone who just wants to jump in and make the things happen that I want to make happen, and to actually take a step back and go, no, hang on, it's more than just, starting a book club, or that's all great, but how can I bring that so that everything that I'm doing is actually working towards the goal that I want, and to see every part of the things that I'm doing being a bigger picture, but also recognizing that just doing those little things isn't perhaps going to have the lasting change. What happens when I'm not there? What happens if I'm, and I mean in that space, or as, longer term, what will have a longer impacting change on this culture? And Kay really challenged me to look deeper at this than how do you make a change to the culture, the very fibers of what's happening there, rather than just a surface level change.
I think listeners would want to know, and I've certainly found that oftentimes when we want to initiate things in our libraries, because they resonate, the changes in the programming that we implement in our library resonates and has that sort of ripple effect throughout the entire school community. How did your building administration feel when you wanted to initiate this creating this cultural change and improving this reading culture in your building?
I am incredibly lucky to have very supportive leadership. Our principal acts on trust leadership. He has a book on trust leadership. So he's very much, you're the professional, you know what you need in that space, you tell me how it should be. And I am so lucky to be working under him, to be able to just go, okay, this is what we're doing, to go, right, let me pitch to you what our library could look like. And our next level of leadership are equally supportive of recognizing the different roles of the librarian. From, our director of curriculum is so acknowledges the work that we do in information literacy and supporting the curriculum. Our director of realms of thinking, which is all about the pedagogy at our school, is so recognizes how important reading is and the library is in creativity and thinking. And it's just, so when I had the opportunity to start looking at how we could redefine the role of our library within this school. I knew that I was in the very lucky, I know not everyone has that position, but very lucky position to be able to make those changes.
And that you recognize how lucky you are too, because I think with that perspective is so vital. Kay, in part 2 of Teacher Librarian as Leader series, you explained the different types of power exercised by leaders. And friends, this is where I want to go back to graduate school, and I want to have that mentor. I crave these deep dives, and I had so much fun prepping for this episode because I got to do the kind of reading that I really missed because I loved going and doing these deep dives, in this case, talking about creating cultural change. Kay, you talked about how teacher librarians using the power of influence to change in our schools. And I'm hoping that you'll explain expert power, because of all the different types of power that Kay explains in her article, the one I identified with, and I think other people will listening to this conversation, is expert power, because I think this is where teacher librarians have the best hope of exercising change in our spaces.
Absolutely. I totally agree that it's really important for us as TLs to understand all different types of power because they're held by all different players, people in our community, and understanding where people are coming from and where they're deriving their source of power from and how to expect that to impact us can be really important. But for the TL, we talk a lot about leading from the middle because the TL has this expert power, usually, or school librarian. I keep saying TL, I'm sorry, but that's our terminology here in Australia. But I recognize school librarians, teacher librarians, people who are working in school libraries have this expert power. Quite often, we're the only one in the school that holds that particular role. Classroom teachers, there's a bunch of them, subject teachers, a bunch of them, but there's only one TL or school librarian in most cases. And so we have this combination of information management expertise, as well as knowledge of curriculum and pedagogy. And that combination, it's like our superpower, and it is an expert power. We have expertise in that other people in our community don't necessarily have. And so this sort of power is within us, it's personal to us. It's not as a result of our position or as a result of, where we are situated within the school bureaucracy and things like that. And so it's highly relevant to us because it's not influenced by where we are located in the school in terms of the hierarchy and things like that. And it's really important that we make other people in our community aware of that expertise that we have, so that not only do they realize they can come to us for support and assistance, that we can actually help lighten their load and create even more amazing learning opportunities for students, but also because a lot of times the place of the TL in the school, like we were saying before, isn't understood and is often sort of sidelined because we're seen as the person who just puts the books on the shelf and loans the books out and things like that. Whereas we do have this incredible expert power that we can use to support and help build that wonderful reading culture, that the enhanced learning opportunities, and also offering that space for students. Libraries are really now being seen as spaces of great well-being and safety as that third space in the school. And so that's really what I feel like expert power is all about. And the last thing finally is that sometimes being in that role, being the only person in the school, or being in a role that's not understood and sometimes sidelined, it can get hard and it can get really we can get down on ourselves and feel like, well, we're not important and, we're not able to contribute anything. But recognizing that we do have that expert power can give us the boost that we need to be more confident and more motivated to be able to step out and say, hey, I can do this for you. I can advocate for my role and really support our community in this way.
I'm absolutely inspired. I'm so glad you're giving us this pep talk, Kay, because I'll tell you what, not all of us, and I'm going to say many of us, were not assigned inspiring mentors, and we might have been given somebody in the building who could, help us along when we were new. But I'll tell you what, wasn't a librarian, and it certainly would not have necessarily appreciated the nuance or all the complexity of the job that we have and the potential that we have to do so much good for our school communities. Kay, in part 3, you started talking about these business models, and I'm hoping you can explain that, because schools aren't businesses, but why do you feel that a business model might be appropriate in applying it to our particular circumstances?
There's a couple of different reasons. The first reason is that something I realized when I was working through this business literature and working with other business academics and planning subjects is that in business, people are always advocating for themselves and their role, and there's a big emphasis on having a pitch and being able to talk yourself up and the importance of your position. And in education, we're much more modest, and we're much less likely to feel like we need to sell our role or sell our position or sell our expert power that we have. And while I understand that there's a reason many of us chose education, because we're not salespeople and we're not that sort of really outgoing, push yourself to the front type personality. And I understand that, because that's why I'm in education. I didn't want to have that sort of salesperson. I didn't have that in me. But I think it's really important for us to realize that it's not just TLs or school librarians that do need to advocate continually for our position and promote ourselves. That this is something that is very common throughout our working society these days. And we should be proud of what we can contribute. And it's not necessarily about bragging or boasting. It's just about saying, hey, look, I can help you with this. I'm here and I'd like to do this to support you, or this is my strategy or my skill that I suggest, and recognizing that we have that expert power and being proud to share that with other people. So that was the first recognition that I had with the business theories and the business practices. And the second one was certainly with the iceberg theory with the culture. Was it really hit me that when I'd been reading about reading culture, about people's experiences of changing reading culture and the frustrations that they'd been experiencing and not being able to shift the culture, it was because, not always, but one of the reasons I thought was because being a school librarian or a teacher librarian, we hear the concept of reading culture and we latch onto reading. We think that it's all about reading, but we forget that word culture. The culture part is like just a descriptor. Whereas in fact, if we flip it and look at the concept of culture, which this theory was about, this iceberg theory, very well-known business theory of culture change, is that the things that we look at when we want to change reading culture, if we just focus on reading, is promoting a book or having a book club or those one-off events that Madison was talking about that get people excited about reading. And that's fantastic, but that's a very temporary thing. Whereas if we think about it from the culture change perspective, we understand that the culture is actually like an iceberg. There's big parts right down the bottom that need to change before we will see entire cultures changing. And those big parts down the bottom are people's underlying beliefs and opinions about school libraries, about the role of the TL, about the value of reading and reading for pleasure. All of those sorts of things are what we need to shift if we want to see that ongoing change in reading culture. So yeah, it was more of a flip for me that I went, wait a minute, it is about reading, but it's actually about culture. And that was, yeah.
Friends, all I want to do is enroll in one of Kay's classes. I I've decided I'm going back to graduate school, friends, and I'm going to be enrolling in a program in Australia. All right. So, Madison, in your second post, you explore what culture means and how you would attempt to measure it.
So picking up exactly like what Kay was just saying, that I needed to look beyond what was happening in the library. I needed to look at what was happening in the entire school, about what people thought about reading, about what people thought about the school library and what my role was. And it was really interesting going through that. And I haven't finished. That's an ongoing thing. And I think we've been saying this takes time. The actual process, it's taking time. And other things pop up and become a priority, and this has fallen. But this is an ongoing thing. So I really wanted to first look at, did we actually have a poor reading culture? Where were we on this sort of spectrum of reading cultures, and how we would interpret that? And I wanted to measure our starting point, not only so I could understand it, but so that I could then see when I did make changes, what sort of impact they had. And I could say, okay, all right, well, doing this sort of activity or these sort of programs, that has this impact. Doing this to my collection has this impact. And I could look at that. So I've started with a few things, and we integrated action research into this. And again, Kay has led me through the processes of that, and you'll find the information on her amazing website. But I started with little things, looking at our loan statistics. Because I have been at a few schools in the past few years, I'd actually collected loan statistics from all of these schools. And I wasn't comparing them so much as overall numbers, but I wanted to look at different collections. Okay, so this school had really high graphic novel stats. Why is that? Is it because of the students were really loving it at that school, or is it because of the way it was presented or the books that we had? I looked at, compared sort of, okay, the picture book stats at this school were really, really high. Is that because of the layout, all forward-facing picture books, or was it because at that school our nonfiction collection was a lot poorer than one of my other schools who had an incredible, like, I miss that school's nonfiction collection. Oh my goodness. And the nonfiction collection, the stats for that were massive. Like, just, I've never seen anything of the like. And when, I could talk about nonfiction forever, but I wanted to measure that. So I looked at that, not so much as a comparison of, oh, we're doing this badly, but what was the bit that really worked, or what could I identify? I also started to do some, like I was doing the Year 6 orientation lessons. So at the end of the year, I was working with the Year 6s, bringing them up into the library, and I wanted to sort of survey them before our lessons and then at the end of our lessons. I only had a couple of lessons with them, but I was asking them some simple sort of questions like, what do you feel about reading? Do you like reading? Do you not? What do you think about the library? And what are some of the things that happens in a library? And then we did our lessons, and, I went crazy with orientation hunts and QR codes and getting the virtual reality and exploring through augmented reality and pulling books apart and cutting them up and doing book craft. And, I really threw everything at them and went, okay, this is what happens in the secondary library. And then surveyed at them at the end. Okay, what do you think about reading? What do you think about what happens in a library? So just looking at those little things, assessing culture about that, and just sort of looking, how on earth was I going to measure that? And some of the things that we've enacted this year have already had some pretty good success in just changing the way students talk about reading and the library. And so some of this research that I'm gathering is not, massive statistics. It's conversations and little anecdotes from students. So previous years, we'd have students come in and say, can I read in here? Are we allowed to read in here? I was like, oh, wow, if you're walking into the library asking that question, what do you think actually happens in here? Whereas now I have students saying, so we have enacted a student-driven collection development policy now this year. So that means students can request the books. I will buy the books that they want. I now have students saying to me, oh, I love the books that you're getting in here, or asking, why do you buy the books that we request? And being able to have that conversation with them to say, this is about building this relationship with you. I would much rather purchase a book that you want than something that I think you might want, because I am guaranteed one loan because you're going to borrow that, then that's better odds than me buying something and you may or may not borrow it, that you are going to share that with other students, and that by purchasing what you are saying you need and love, I am building that relationship, and that student is continually coming back and going, oh, thank you. They're valuing that. Then they're bringing in the whole group of friends to come down and do that. So building that and just gathering those little snippets of conversation to go, okay, we're actually changing the culture about what people think about this space and about reading, which is very exciting.
Well, and Madison, in your third post, I loved all of this, friends. I read everything. And in your third post, you explored culture change and research. And there are a couple salient points that really stuck out for me. First of all, in your third post, you identify that culture change takes time. You identified that culture change must be aligned with the current existing culture, and that you should build upon the current strengths that you have in your space. And the last one I love, the importance of listening, because it is in listening where we learn. And I have had to repeat this several times to people who happen to live in my house, that if you want to learn, you should be listening more. And so thank you so much for making sure that we remember all of that moving forward in our own, creating change in our own space.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a long time, because the whole purpose of this is to look at the big picture. It's not just what's happening in the space, it's what's happening in the entire school. And I think that's also a bit of a pressure off us, that it's not always upon us. It's not within our power to change absolutely everything. Some of it is out of our power. But I love that it's got to be aligned with the existing culture. And for me, that was then, okay, what do I look at? What's happening in the school? Where can I pick up on this? So I approached the principal and said, can I have a look at the strategic plans that have been put forward about the school and the future ones, really assessing that and how the library fits within that. How do I fit within the school's goals? How does what I'm doing and what I'm saying the library's doing actually helps achieve the school's goals, so that I'm not trying to drive my own thing, that I'm not trying to, push in a different direction, that I'm actually working towards the same goal and then piping up in the background going, hey, this is actually helping you get where you want to go. Oh, let's all work together. And then I did some things like a brand audit. So I worked with our director of marketing to come up with, and this came out of a whole another sort of incident that popped up with our library branding, but had the opportunity to sit down and look at all of our platforms. And he said to me, how does everything that you have reflect everything that you do? So looking at our library homepage, how does that reflect more than just the catalogue? How does that reflect our Instagram and our databases and our ClickView, which is our online TV sort of access? So how does it, when it's, a one-shot picture of that, and how does our Instagram reflect everything, all the aspects? And so I've really taken that on board and thought, okay, this is my opportunity to showcase what we're doing. So going through that process, going through a brand audit, included sitting down with different people throughout the school and asking them questions about what they understood the library to be and do, and where they saw the value. And that was everyone from the principal through to teachers and assistants and students. And that, again, that's still ongoing. But there was some really incredible responses to, things like textbooks. You just do textbooks. And that person who said that was because we'd just be pumping out, please return all your textbooks to these year 12s, but the teachers were included. And I was like, wow, because we had hit them so hard with that, all they got from us was textbooks. So that was really interesting. The conversation with the principal, and he said community. If I had to sum it up in one word, it's you build community. It's like, perfect. How do I help build on that? So it's picking up what we already had and also assessing what people did know of us and what we then needed to. Okay, you need to know that we do more than textbooks. And he did. He absolutely did. But he said, if I had to pick up one word right now, it's textbooks. So having that, everything that we get, like our overdue notices, reassessing them, rewriting them so that when they hit inboxes of parents or students, like if that's the one thing that they hear from us because the teachers dragged them in, they've had to borrow a book and they didn't want to and now it's overdue, and if there's one thing that they get from us, what does that say about our space? And so I really wanted to take a step back and sort of audit everything that we did and how that fit within the school's culture.
Well, and Madison, it's so fascinating to hear what you have to say, but Kay, as an instructor of pre-service school librarians, pre-service teacher librarians, hearing Madison's journey in this process has got to sort of feed some of what you will then be passing along to those that you are training to be the next sort of generation of teacher librarians.
Absolutely. I just clarify, they're not pre-service because they are already qualified teachers, and most of them are practicing teachers. Some of them even are in school libraries, sorry. But yeah, it definitely informs. It's not, on the ALIA mentorship, I was on the mentor list and Madison was on the mentee list, but I've learned so much from Madison as well, because that's the thing about being at a university is you are a step away from the practice. And so that is certainly something that being able to work with Madison, I've been learning through her journey and seeing just how she is. I can say all this stuff, but she's the one actually putting it into place and experiencing the results of those. And certainly that is something that I will feed back to my students, and I do. And also I'm really keen to continue to create those connections with, the university calls it creating connections with industry, but I just like to think of it as creating connections with other teacher librarians and inviting them along and getting them to share so that and in fact, Madison's coming to speak to some of my students next week because she's going to be sharing some of her journey, because it is really important that we weave that theory in with the practice so that it's really useful and authentic.
Well, and Kay, I'm also curious because, Madison talked about branding and, nowhere in the school do you hear about branding. You might hear about it in the sports. Our sports teams oftentimes will have certain brands, but this need to give the library a brand. It's fascinating because it's very business-like, and we're creating that image. You don't hear the second graders, or I'm going to use American terms here, but our second grade team doesn't have a brand. Our fifth graders don't have a brand. You don't see branding being something that's vitally important to, say, our English teachers at the high school. But when it comes to being a library and being a learning commons and the spaces that we offer, this idea of a brand is a very business concept, isn't it?
It is a business concept, but like with so many of these things, just because it comes from business doesn't mean that we can't adapt it and make it into something that's powerful and useful for us. And I feel that school libraries have changed so much so quickly. And it really, even just 10 years ago, we didn't have half of the digital presence that we have now. We didn't have so many opportunities to connect with students and teachers and the whole community through so many different channels and avenues. And so now school libraries do have an Instagram account, do have, they will have their TikTok, they'll do book talks, they'll do all sorts of things. They'll be offering databases, they'll be offering, click view services, all these different things. And so being able to group them all together under a brand and say, this is our library, it gives the community a hook, a way of understanding that all of these different seemingly sometimes disparate avenues of information and access are all just big part of that umbrella of the school library. And then if we can connect the school library brand to the school brand, which, as Madison said, really tying our our library strategic plans to the school strategic plans, then we are able to say this is our school library community, and see how it fits in so well with our school community. It's all part of one, and we're all working together towards that shared aim and that shared goal. So, and in terms of when I was at Australian International School, we had students from 18 months through to 18 years. And so we had 4 libraries across the campus. And the library, I wanted to get everyone to understand that although we had 4 libraries, we were one school library. And so we ended up having the school libraries network, and the babies 18 months to 4 years, we called it the nest. So the school, that little branch of the library was the nest. So even though it's called branding, but it doesn't have to be cold and, business-like. It's about giving a language to help people express and talk about their library. So,
I love that. That's wonderful. Madison, you made a startling realization in your 4th post, and I'd love for you to read this again. I feel silly reading your words. So you wrote it, and you love to write. This is not my forte. So, Madison, would you let us know what you found out in your 4th post?
If a school is to truly have a positive and pervasive reading culture, it has to be school-wide and school-driven. But the school library cannot be solely and wholly responsible for the school's reading culture.
Thank you. Did you, friends, and for those of you in the back, did you all hear that? Okay, this is not on us 100%. We can't move mountains. And the reality is it's not a burden for us to bear solely.
And I think that was it was challenging to come to that realization and to write that. And obvious, it might be obvious, we can't control that. But I think so many of us sort of beat ourselves up because we think it's on us, or, the way that we've started to do things, or that hasn't worked, and yet it's out of our control. But I think I have also, so it's a relief, but it's also challenging because it's okay, well, do I just give up now then? So what I have done now is to look at it in a different way, and going back to that last point that we're talking about of fitting it in with the school's culture. So if I know what the school's culture is, and looking at some of those examples of schools that have a really positive reading culture and how they've enacted that, a lot of those times it's because top leadership have come through and said, reading is a top priority. We're going to do it in every single class, and they enact a program. Now, the reality is that most of us are not going to have that opportunity, and I'm not sure, I don't know, maybe I don't think that is right, because every school is going to be different. And I know that is never going to happen at our school because we have a very different focus. Our focus is our new pedagogy. Our focus is innovation, creativity, well-being, and entrepreneurship. So my challenge now was to then look at what is our focus in the school, what is the school's culture, and how do I then fit reading culture into that? How do I then go, this is what that looks like in our school? Where are we currently, and where do we go from here? And I think that was a relief. It gave me purpose, and it's also given me a way forward that's really exciting, that I think is going to get my leaders on board.
Yes, Kay.
If I can just jump in there and say that's absolutely exactly right. And that's also the opportunity that it's one of the things I love about the TL role is that we get to work with all of the students in the entire school, but we also get to work with all of the teachers across all of the year levels and all of the different subject areas and we get to work with administration. And we really are the connectors across the whole community. And so giving them, hearing from them and giving them a space to connect with us, oftentimes, there's whole faculties like the science and the maths faculties and HPE sports faculties that just go, oh, we don't need a library. Why would we talk to the library? But as Madison has said, by finding out more about the aims and the goals and the culture across the entire school, that's where we can then have a little bit of a think and talk to them and say, what is it that you want? What is it you're trying to achieve? And see how the library, how we can fit our goals in with those goals and build that connection throughout the entire school, rather than just thinking of ourselves as an isolated unit or a separate area.
Listening to both of you talk, it reminds me, and I'm very aware, especially in the job that I do every day, is that in many respects, what I do is something of a connector between the main office business, between the administration and the teachers. And oftentimes there is a disconnect. And if I don't connect those two, that the messaging that I'm getting from the administration, the messaging that I'm getting from the teachers, I've never talked to more teachers than as a school librarian, because they all have we all have a common purpose in that I can give you some support. And I am very aware that when I do my job, I make everybody else have to do less. So the administrators have less on their plate because I am in my role. The teachers have less on their plate because I am in the role I'm in. And then my job is to make sure that everybody realizes that is what I bring to this school is, and I think that many other people are nodding their heads going, exactly. See, I'm supporting everybody, and I can help everybody in this quest. Madison, in your 5th post, I thought this was fantastic because you're pulling some resources and I'm recognizing them. So friends, in Madison's 5th post, it was a little surprising some of the resources that you had linked to: the Florida Power School rubric, as well as the checklists, which were published by the National Library of New Zealand. And I love this idea that we can pull resources because we all have the same shared goal in mind. We all want to build, in this case, a culture of reading. But could you speak to how you sort of came to that realization that we really do owe it to our students to do what we can, even if the information comes from Florida and from New Zealand?
Well, I think the more you look, the more that there are out there. But I think I knew about some of them because of you. So thank you very much, because the Florida Power School Library came from you and your conversation. I hope I get this right. I think it's episode 151 with Carrie Friday. And when I heard that conversation, I knew I had to go and look up that rubric, because it's such an incredible resource. So if you haven't looked at that, listeners, please go and look, because it's just incredible. So I started there. I knew that was there. And then the more that I looked for, the more that I found. So the National Library of New Zealand have incredible resources on there for school librarians. There are so many that are for librarians themselves, from different state and national organizations. Different countries have different ones, so it's finding one, but I think bringing them all together and looking at different parts, that offered me something that I could draw upon from a range of things, because at the end of the day, we're all working towards the same goal here across country borders. It's just we're all trying to work towards the same thing. And I guess looking at those resources, that's one thing, but also looking at the data that you have. So I think I was talking about it before, comments from students, conversations, anecdotal stuff, as well as your loan statistics, as well as what you can gather from surveying before and after you do things. There's so much that you can pull down upon to start measuring what culture looks like in your school library.
I just love that we are, hashtag better together. And that's never more true than we're talking about the librarians in this listening community, because we have so much we can share with one another, which is why I'm incredibly grateful we're having this conversation with Australia right now. I'm sure that Kay, in your, adventures in academia, you are encountering a lot of library professionals and teacher librarian professionals, and who are, like you, also inspiring teacher librarians who will be moving into the workforce very soon. Tell us a little bit about your connection with your peers around the world.
Oh, well, I mean, this is the thing. I'm so blessed, and I think it's such a wonderful time because we can connect with people all over the world so relatively easily. I mean, time zones sometimes can be a challenge, but that's probably one of the only obstacles that we have. And so I think that being able to connect with TLs, practicing not only from all over Australia but also from other places in the world is such a incredible privilege. And it's just being able to have access those resources from all different places. I know that in New South Wales at the moment, they've just launched a new information fluency framework, and it's a really awesome tool for teacher librarians, but it was influenced by the Empire State Information Fluency Continuum. I think I've got that right, and the work by Barbara Stripling, and it's that was definitely something that was consulted along the way. I know that lots of our students are huge fans of the guided inquiry design framework, and Carol Coulthau and her colleagues are she's like a little library goddess for us. Because the work that is being done in that area is just so important. And so it's really wonderful to be able to connect. And I just think that the more we share, like you said, the stronger we are, and we are all working together towards the same goals. And so being able to harness that, and it's why I'm so passionate about personal learning networks and about making those connections. So, yeah.
Kay, when you and Madison present in August at the National Education Summit held in Brisbane, what do you feel would be most important to convey to teacher librarians who are attending those sessions?
I think there are two main things that I would really like the TLs to take away, and they're things that we have actually spoken about today. And the first is that changing reading culture of a school takes time, and it's certainly not something that happens overnight, and it's something that we need to consider, that we're not just changing parts of our library or parts of our practice, we're actually looking at changing the underlying beliefs and opinions that are held within our school community, and those are informed by a huge number of factors and influences that are even well beyond the school itself. And so it's a big job, and it's something that will take time, but it's not something that the TL needs to do by themselves. And using that role of being a connector and working with everyone, all of the different teachers, the leadership, all of those different groups within the school, parents and the community as well. All of that is how we can build that momentum. And the second thing I would really like to TLs to remember is that, just like what Madison is doing, it's important that we collect evidence along the way. So it's really vital that whenever we put an intervention or make a change or have a discussion, that we record the evidence, and so that we build that story over time of how the culture is changing, what is changing about the culture, and being able to measure, this is where we started, this is where we are now, this is where we want to get to, because that's what's going to give the energy to keep moving forward, and also encourage others to be with us on that journey, because they can see the changes. It's taking time. The changes are small. We're moving forward in increments, but we are moving forward. It's not just something that a dream or it's something we're taking action towards. And those small steps are also what will give you as the TL practitioner the energy and the encouragement to keep your spirits up and not think, oh, it's just too hard. You are making, great steps forward all the time, make sure you record those so that you can look back on those bad days and say, hey, remember where I started? Let's just pull our socks up and keep on going.
Madison, I'm hoping that you're going to keep us up to date with all that you are doing moving forward. And I don't know if you'll have a part 6 or a part 7, but listeners, I strongly encourage you to follow Madison and take a look at her blog, because I'm so envious of both of you, because you write beautifully. And anybody who's ever listened to me ramble on knows that if I could write, I would have written, and I don't. So here we have the podcast. So Madison, I am so grateful for all that you have shared with me and with everyone. Would you let us know how we can follow you on social media?
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, on Twitter, I am at Madison's Library. On Instagram, I'm at Madison's_library. And you'll also find our school Instagram at SPS Library. And the website's madisonslibrary.com.
Fantastic. And how about Kay? Would you share with us, because I'm so grateful you and I are now following each other on Twitter. Would you let us know how we can add you to our virtual PLN?
Sure. I am at Kay Oddone, and that's with K-A-Y, my full name, Oddone, on Twitter. And my website online portfolio is Linking Learning. Unfortunately, it's a little bit sadly neglected at the moment, but I am planning on working on that again. And my university course is at Sturt University, and it's the Master of Education Teacher Librarianship. So if you're excited about becoming a qualified teacher librarian, sign up, because it is a really wonderful course, and you can do it from anywhere because it's online.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a fantastic conference.
Thank you so much, Amy. You're an absolute rock star, and so grateful to you for putting this podcast together from us here in Australia all the way around the world. It's an absolute resource. So thank you so much.
Most definitely. Thank you. I've been totally inspired about podcasting and excited about the future. So thank you so much.
Friends, I am so grateful to Kay and to Madison for all the incredible work they put into researching and exploring this idea of creating culture change, and then helping us understand how we can apply that in our libraries every day. To make matters more interesting, if you can imagine trying to record with people on the other side of the planet, I was recording on a Friday night. Kay and Madison were recording on a Saturday morning, and we managed to make this work. And I'm so grateful. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider sending some fan mail to Madison and to Kay, because I'm incredibly grateful for everything they made possible. One last friendly reminder, I encourage you to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more using the code UNITED. The topic of our next episode will be teaming up with athletes and my conversation with Jessica Fitzpatrick. I hope you will tune in.